John Carpenter's The Thing may very well be the greatest science fiction horror movie of all time. It's like every couple of year watch for me, and I'll get more into that later, but I have a history with this movie. And while my opinion on John Carpenter kind of changes over the years, one thing I always stand on business with is the fact that The Thing is the premier science fiction horror movie of all time, only sharing that title with Alien. But what is it about The Thing that makes it stand on this business? What is so good about this movie? Is it the acting? Well, the acting is solid, but it's not like a blowout performance. Is it the special effects? I mean, stellar as the special effects may be, special effects alone can't carry a film. There are plenty of movies that are just complete garbage, but still have really good special effects. Is it the setting, perhaps? I mean, it's in Antarctica, so it's about as isolated as a setting you can get without going into outer space, where if my sources are correct, no one can hear you scream. But while the setting is also great, it's not the defining factor here. Same goes for the writing, the pacing, and the flow. It's all great, but it's like, it seems like everything works together to make this movie as great as it is, and there's not one factor we can kind of crown as the reason why this movie's so good. The Thing is just a movie that seems like it accidentally succeeded in its goals. Every bit that was put into this movie made it the classic that it is, and as I said, not one sole element can take credit for that. I'm not gonna go super deep into the production of The Thing, like it's pretty well known among people who have seen the movie, like how the movie was made, how it was produced, etc. If you're more interested in that, you can check out some documentaries, you can go on TV Tropes or IMDb or Wikipedia, or if you're too lazy to read, there's probably another video essay that goes deeper into the production lore. John Carpenter has talked about it on numerous occasions, but to kind of give you the rundown on it, The Thing is based on John W. Campbell Jr.'s novella titled Who Goes There, and in itself is a remake of an even looser adaptation of that novella titled The Thing from Another World. While Carpenter's adaptation does pay some homages to The Thing from Another World, it's mostly based on the original novella. And even then, it's more so of an in-concept thing. It follows some of those concepts very closely, but it takes it in other directions entirely. That's the beauty of adapting a short story. You can get a little bit more creative with it, and nobody would really care because the source material left a lot of space to work with. Another adaptation that does that on a high level is Total Recall. Like, the original short story Total Recall's based on is pretty short, so Paul Verhoeven was able to get creative with it. Initially, The Thing from Another World was supposed to be remade by Tobe Hooper back in the 70s, and that one was supposed to be a little bit closer to the 50s one, just with like the big alien, and it was supposed to kind of just be like a slasher thing, I guess, from what I can tell. The script for this movie was written by Burt Lancaster's son, and through production it went from being a more literal adaptation of Campbell's novella to the sci-fi horror masterpiece we all know and love today. While the movie takes place in Antarctica, it was shot in Alaska because I don't even want to know how hard it is to film a movie in Antarctica. It definitely would have ballooned the budget, which initially was $10 million, but ended up kind of ballooning to double that. And this ballooning was likely for the special effects, which were stellar. Like, in all honesty, like, if you need any sort of indication of how good these special effects are, Rob Bottin almost died from exhaustion working on these creature effects. There was a lot of suffering involved in this movie, like Rob Bottin almost died from exhaustion. John Carpenter has had multiple bouts of skin cancer in his life, which he attributes to the excessive sunburn he got from the Alaskan sun while shooting this movie. Kurt Russell almost blew himself up with a dynamite stick. Like, a lot of shit went down making this movie, but it was all worth it. Or was it? I think one thing that makes The Thing work is that, like, from start to finish, it is just building tension. And there are payoffs, but then as soon as those payoffs happen, the tension starts again. And it all starts because a Swedish guy shows up at the beginning having a freakout.
Not Swedish, Mac, the Norwegian.
And then bam, he's dead, the dog he was chasing comes to the American crewman for comfort, and literally none of our questions are answered. In fact, we may actually have more questions. I also want to note that the Norwegian guy was played by the dude who played fucking Peter Schuler in Breaking Bad, the guy who defibrillates himself when Gus Fring dies. I did not know that until today. I was like, oh shit! I can't really see his face because he's got like all that heavy gear on, but like you can kind of see it. I'm like, huh, that's kind of fucked up. Now, granted, you know, you may have more questions after this scene, but if you speak Norwegian, then the entire shock of the movie is ruined because the guy is barking in Norwegian that the dog isn't a dog but some kind of thing. But you see, I don't speak Norwegian, so that's fine. I really don't think anybody outside of Norway or like the Norwegian people speak Norwegian. Norwegian. It's just like one of those languages. This ensures that we're just as confused as the characters going into this movie, and we're gonna have to kind of just discover what everything is with them. And of course, they end up discovering that the dog is some kind of exploding tendril monster, and it starts attacking the other dogs. Okay, that doesn't quite happen that fast. There is a bit of build-up to that. But it's very clear that there is an issue with that dog. Like, something is, like, wrong with that dog. It's, like, walking around. It's kind of just, like, taking everything in. It's not acting really like a dog, but I think nobody really gives a shit in the camp because they just had, like, a crazed Norwegian man start firing at everybody. Like, when MacReady and Doc Copper go to fly out to the Norwegian camp, the dog seems to know that something is up. Like, it's watching it like, ah, shit. It's weird how they got the dog to act like this. Now, this dog was named Jed, like the actor dog. He was in the White Fang movies, and he's like a half Malamute, half wolf hybrid, so like apparently his behavior even unsettled the cast. All these little bits of body language where you see this dog like monitoring what's going on, you might actually like kind of miss on a first viewing, but when you review it, you're like, oh yeah, he knows he's gotta do this. Like, this dog knows he's on borrowed time, and that it's only a matter of time before they figure him out. And again, this dog lurking the hallways is just like creepy. It's just a dog, but it's not a dog. Something about animals like acting not like animals like just makes something creepy. I don't know. The dog is just lurking the hallways looking for somebody who's off the main path and alone so that it can do its thing. Ha! Get it? Do its thing. Oh dear God! Now, what I do like about this is the shadow on the wall looks like it could be someone, but it's not anyone. It's just fucking Dick Warlock there who looks vaguely like one of the crew members, but we don't quite know who. I'm gonna get a little more into this later, but like they clearly did this on purpose because we want to know that the dog did something to somebody, but we don't want to know exactly who they did it to. And it also cuts off at the moment where the dog enters, so we don't exactly know what's happening, but I imagine if the camera lingered on it, it would have gone a little bit like this. Now, MacReady and Copper see that something went terribly wrong at this Norwegian camp, and they find some horrid abomination monster. So they gather up all their data, they grab the specimen, and they head back, knowing that something is wrong and something could be going wrong at the camp next. But at this point, the dog has been wandering around the site for quite a while before Clark locks it up. And you know what, while we're here, like, I'm going to be talking a bit about Clark throughout this review, but I kind of want to call into question Clark's competence as a dog handler here. So, a strange dog shows up to the camp from another camp. You have no idea what the dog's medical history is, you didn't really even run any sort of, like, basic diagnostics on the dog, and then you decide to completely breach quarantine procedures and stick the dog in the kennel with all the other healthy dogs. Like, even if there wasn't, like, a parasitic alien in there, like, we're talking at least an outbreak of kennel cough amongst these dogs. Like, he should have kept them separate. I don't know. It's just, like, as somebody who, like, understands how to work with animals, like, it's just like, oh my god. Granted, I'm sure the Thing dog would have gotten out and caused trouble, but even still, like, this just causes more problems. And this all lends credence to my Clark is an idiot theory, which will be revisited multiple times throughout the video. Thanks, Clark, ya fucking... Alright, well, I guess now is as good a time as ever to talk about some of the special effects. Like, most of them were done by Rob Bottin. The dog thing, however, from what I can tell, was a Stan Winston job. This is one of the last effects shots that they did, and Rob Bottin at this point was hospitalized with exhaustion, and, you know, he missed the last bit of shooting. So Stan Winston did an uncredited bit of work because he didn't want to take away from Rob's masterful creature effects. And let's be real, Stan Winston is a top-tier player in practical effect. And the dog thing looks consistent with all the other creatures that we see throughout the movie. It looks amazing. The sound design for this thing is creepy. Apparently they just like ran a lion's roar through some electrical filter and pitched it up. And it's fucking creepy. But even in the lead up to actually seeing the full monster, like how the dog just kind of plops itself down and then just like rips itself open, fucking skull falls out, it starts like attacking all the other dogs. And like you feel bad for the dogs because the dogs, you know, they know something's not right, and then they just see there's this other dog like fall apart and start trying to fucking attack them. It's just a horrifying scene, and this horrifying scene causes MacReady to realize something is up, and he puts two and two together, utilizing his knowledge of what he saw at the Norwegian camp, and demands the flamethrower.
Mac wants the flamethrower.
Mac wants the what?
That's what he said, now move!
Now, it may seem like a total plot convenience that they just have flamethrowers in an Antarctic base, but this isn't completely far-fetched. Well, nowadays they wouldn't have military-grade flamethrowers, like they do have fire-spraying devices to melt ice and to thaw engines, and at this point in time it's not completely out of the realm of reality that they would have a few flamethrowers for that purpose. The movie really starts to come together once they figure out what they're dealing with, and every cast member plays a pretty good role. I mean, Kurt Russell is the badass MacReady, fucking Keith David is the skeptical black dude, which is like something he plays in another Carpenter movie later. Wilford Brimley is the man of science, and every other cast member in here is pretty good. I specifically like Blair because, like, you know, he kind of takes charge of the situation at first. He's the one who figures out how the thing operates. Everyone else is confused, but still somewhat optimistic that the threat is under control, but things are about to get so much worse. Get it? Things are so— oh god! They decide for safety precautions to put all the thing remains into a storage unit in which, you know, kind of leads to Bennings getting attacked, and he gets caught midway through assimilation. Now, this scene is pretty disturbing. Like, it's disturbing for every point of view. It's disturbing for the humans because they're seeing one of their friends getting turned into this horrid monster that is going to pretend to be the friend and kind of situate itself within the group, but it's also kind of terrifying from the monster's point of view as well. Like, the scream is terrifying to us, but then you start to think why it's doing the scream, and it becomes even more terrifying. Now, I want to go ahead here, and I want to say I do not think that the thing is evil or malicious. It is an animal, and assimilating life forms to survive and reproduce is its biological function. It's my function! A dangerous biological function to us, but nevertheless a biological function for this creature. So imagine you're some animal that's just doing what it was created to do, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by a bunch of people who set you on fire. Again, justified response from the humans given the threat that this creature presents, but the thing isn't screaming because it's trying to intimidate anybody. I think it's like a primal fear scream. It's like when a rabbit gets snatched in the jaws of a coyote. It knows it's about to die, and that scream is just really all it can do about it. And meanwhile, you know, we get to see Blair, the man of science, doing some extensive research on the biology of this creature. It's a nice little kind of sequence of events. Like, he's learning about it through research and understanding the science behind it, and MacReady and the rest of the gang have seen firsthand how this works. We get to see the scientific end with the implications for what it would mean if this thing got out versus the actual raw action of how it would happen. And it's kind of funny because Blair is the logician, he's the logical one. He's the man of science, and MacReady, while not dumb, just isn't quite equipped to understand the alien life form on a scientific level here. He even lampshades this earlier. But
how's this motherfucker wake up after thousands of years in the ice?
And how can it look like a dog?
I don't know how. Because it's different than us, see? Because it's from outer space. What do you want from me? Ask him.
But Blair is the one who completely cracks at the realization of what this thing is, immediately suspecting Clark and eventually going completely apeshit.
You think that thing wanted to be an animal? No dog making 1,000 miles to the coast. No, you don't understand. That thing wanted to be us.
He causes a scene. He smashes all the communication equipment, he smashes all the helicopters, and like, he makes it so that nobody comes in or out of the camp. He's the one that goes completely crazy despite the one being predisposed to be the smart one. He's the one that's supposed to think things through, but there's nothing to think through here. He's just completely cracked.
Okay, Blair. Come on, man. You don't want to hurt anybody.
I'll kill you.
And as a result, MacReady becomes the de facto leader. And MacReady's the one who manages to keep his cool. But even still, they've completely figured out how this thing works and that there's something going on, but the things are a few steps ahead. There's at least one person assimilated by this creature, and they're going to go out of their way to do whatever they can to make sure that nobody figures out who is who. For all the praise that this movie gets for its body horror and its creature effects, like, the paranoia that is created with this movie is far greater greater than any jump scare or gore shot could be. Even knowing what happens in this movie, having watched it a few dozen times, I still feel the tension of both the character struggles as well as the isolation. The idea that at any point, the person you're talking to, who's been a close friend to you for years, could get you alone in a room, explode, and assimilate you. Or even like the concept that you could be a completely normal person, but everybody in the room thinks that you're one of these things. And they could turn on you thinking that you're one of the monsters, and then, you know, you're not one of the monsters. And then also realizing that one of the monsters is probably making other people think that you yourself are one of them. That itself is creepy enough, and that's kind of what happens to MacReady midway through the movie. The Thing knows that he's a strong leader and that he's one of the biggest threats to its biological function because he's figured out how it works so fast, so it goes out of its way to sow paranoia and turn the crew against him. When the group decides to test infected blood next to like blood they had in cold storage, you think there might be a chance that they get a step ahead. But then the Thing destroys the blood packages and there are suspects who are Gary or Copper. And at that point, MacReady manages to take charge of the situation pretty quickly. During this point, the last scientific mind there, who is Fuchs, tries to come up with a new type of test, but then he gets ambushed and he's found dead. And rewatching this, it's really funny that like the three people that MacReady separates here that he thinks are the Thing are like 100% not the Thing. Logically, sure, one can conclude that he made a good guess, you know, Clark, Copper, Gary, but none of them are the Thing. And that just kind of shows how good the Thing is at throwing you off its trail. And it's that makes the Thing so scary, that while it is an animal enacting its biological functions, it also does gain intelligence with every creature that it assimilates. Which means that it has a human-level intellect and understands how humans work and think, and ergo knows how to manipulate humans and use human nature as a weapon to misdirect any attempt to identify it. It is actively shifting suspicion onto other members of the crew so that it can stay hidden longer and do more of what it needs to do. Going back to when the dog was wandering around the camp, it's almost as if it was scouting who the best candidates to assimilate would be, and honestly, when we get a little more in, I'll explain why I think it chose who it chose, but the point I'm making here is yes, it is an opportunistic predator, and opportunity does factor into its choices. It knows damn well that Copper and MacReady are going to the other camp and are soon going to figure out what the Thing is, and that it has a very limited time frame to do what it needs to do, and that time frame was devoted completely to the Thing not only seeing what it could assimilate, but seeing who would be the best candidates to push suspicion onto. Obviously, the Thing knew that Clark would be suspect number one if it went for Clark, and it figured that he was more useful as a diversion than as a host, as immediately, because of Clark's vicinity to the dogs, he would be suspect number one. So the Thing is smart enough to know, like, yeah, let's leave that guy because he's going to take a lot of suspicion off me later. It's really after the sabotage of the blood that shit starts to hit the fan. It's when things really start to break down. Haha, get it, things? Oh dear God! Everyone basically suspects everyone. Mac gets implicated in the Epstein files, the assimilation thing, and Knowles decides to cut his tow line when they go outside the camp at night. And then the suspicions grow stronger when MacReady somehow makes it back at night during a storm without a tow line. At this point, MacReady realizes, like, there's a total breakdown in communication here, and he's savvy enough to know immediately that they're going to try and kill him. So being as pragmatic as he is, he goes full defense mode and arms himself with enough dynamite to blow the entire facility sky high. Again, playing off into MacReady's earlier establishment that he'd rather flip the board than lose. Earlier in the movie, when he's playing an electronic chess game on a computer, he just pours his drink into the circuits when it beats him. That was like $1,000 computer he just destroyed there. But the funny thing about this, and this I did not, like, this was recently pointed out to me. Now, I'm not a chess wizard, see what I did. Oh God! But some people have pointed out that the chess wizard computer didn't actually have him in checkmate. So MacReady wasn't completely out of line when he called it a cheating bitch. Like, he was just in check, not checkmate. Also, it's really funny that the computer is voiced by Adrienne Barbeau, who at the time was John Carpenter's wife. I don't know if she ever cheated on him, but that would be really funny if he put that line in here in response to that.
Your move, king to rook 1. My move, rook to knight 6. Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch.
Now, with MacReady holding a stick of dynamite and tensions at an all-time high and things completely breaking down, the Don of the Scottish Mafia ends up having a heart attack. And we get a sequence that's like really iconic in this movie, but it's kind of contested these days as being like one of the cheesier moments in the movie. So when Norris has the heart attack and Doc Copper takes him into the room to work on him, he hits him with the defibrillator, and then we get this gem of a scene here.
Clear!
Clear.
It's like, I mean, I kind of get when people say this is one of the few scenes that hasn't aged well. It's like, it's slapsticky. They even use like a stock slop sound effect, and it's like, I think you could add more like cartoon sound effects to this. Like, I don't know why I'm laughing so much, like, I'm sick. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Haha, get it? Because, oh no! But, I don't know, it's like Looney Tunes logic here. Like, bro sticks his hands into the thing, the teeth open up, and then it's just like, the scream that the doctor does, too. Like, they got, like, an amputee for this scene, and they just put, like, a rubber mask, like, that looked like the doctor's face on him, and I guess that works because you don't see it for that long. But, I don't know, it's just like, that scream is so drawn out. Like, I don't think he died from his injuries. I think he just died from a fucking heart attack or like shock or something. Get it? He died of shock because, alright, you know, just throw shit at me already. So we now know that Norris was a thing, but honestly, you would have never guessed that he was because he shows almost no signs of such a thing. Okay, I gotta stop saying thing. The only real indication that he might have been infected was his unwillingness to take over when Gary realizes he can't be in charge anymore, but you could also chalk that up to him just legitimately not feeling up to it due to his heart condition. And then once they burn Norris, we get another Mastercraft scene that shows that each cell of this creature is an independent organism that will leave the rest to burn if it means it can survive. Which leads us to the head spider scene, and it's like, this head spider thing is like so iconic for the movie, but it's really funny when you think about it because it doesn't do anything. It just kind of skitters around and then gets burned.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
And it really gets me to thinking, like, how ineffective this creature is when it can't use stealth. If it gets you alone and isolated and can assimilate you, yeah, that's one thing, but once it gets caught, like, it does turn into a horrifying monster, but it can't really do anything. Granted, this might be because of the limitations on the special effects at the time. The prequel movie does show that it is capable of attacking when it does come out of its fucking shell, but in this movie, every time it, like, transforms, it gets, like, figured out and then burned, with the exception of one instance that's coming right up. But at its core, the thing isn't quite that dangerous up front. It's dangerous because it's sneaky. It's a very, like, this is like some Cold War allegory shit right here. The enemy isn't really the enemy is the heroes themselves and their lack of rational thinking. And it gets to the point with the lack of rational thinking where MacReady essentially has to hold everyone at flamethrower point so as to properly administer a test to see who's infected or not. Although I guess infected isn't quite the right term. I think assimilation. I gotta keep saying assimilation. Now, to kind of close out the Clark is an idiot thing, like, Clark is suspect number one, and yet he seems somewhat unaware that people would think of him as such. He's upset about his dogs, yeah, but, like, I don't know, there's something like, my whole thing is Clark is just really dumb, and he's, like, one of the big problems. Like, he just seems to be somewhat unaware that anybody would suspect him. And then he starts trying to play his cards and get on MacReady's good side, but, like, MacReady just is, like, completely suspicious of him. And then when MacReady has everyone at flamethrower point, he tries to run at him with a scalpel and gets his brains blown out. A real good Clark, you know, you put the dogs with the other dog, you did nothing to, like, kind of push suspicion off of yourself, and then you try to attack the guy who's already on edge and has a flamethrower. Which leads us to the blood test scene, which is probably my favorite scene in the movie, because, yeah, it's, like, also one of my favorite scenes in all of horror. This is where the tension just gets to a point where you could cut it with a butter knife. Based on the head spider scene, MacReady comes to the conclusion that if he draws blood from everybody and pokes it with a hot needle, anyone who's a thing would have their blood react to it. And they're building it up, we're watching him do all this shit, and we don't even know if this is gonna work. Like, everybody's tied down and skeptical.
I'll show you what I already know.
Crock of shit.
But he continuously goes through every test, which also determines that Clark was not infected. And then while everybody's protesting, talking about how bullshit this thing is, MacReady goes to test Palmer, and yeah, jump scare. This shit got me when I was a kid. They spend so much time drawing it out, building the tension, making you question who it is, whether this test is gonna work or not. And like, you're kind of predisposed to think, okay, it's gonna be fucking Gary at this point, because Gary is the only suspect who's still alive, he hasn't been tested yet. And then it ends up being Palmer, the guy who's mostly been a comic relief character and has been missing from several key scenes, which obviously on a rewatch makes sense that he is a thing, but when you first see it, you're like, nah, it can't be Palmer. But no, it ends up being Palmer, and as a result, you jump out of your seat when you first see this. Which now allows me to dive into my next little bit of theories. Like, this is one of the popular arguments among the fan base, is who was assimilated first? Which human was the thing first? We did see the dog working pretty effectively going through the facility when it knew it would be outed. We saw somebody get assimilated, and it vaguely looks like it could have been either Norris or Palmer. As I mentioned, they purposely made it that it's not somebody that you can identify based on a shadow. Now, in production, they actually did want it to be the guy who played Palmer whose shadow was cast on the wall, but it looked too specific. They couldn't quite make it ambiguous enough. Hence why they went with the stand-in. And when I see a lot of theories, most people say that Palmer is the first one assimilated, and then he got Norris later. But then many people will argue for the other way around. It was certainly one of, like, those two who got it first, because really, like, after them, the only people who get assimilated are Bennings, who gets caught right away, and then, of course, later there's another one. Timelining assimilations is kind of like a fun thing people do. There's one sequence in the movie that kind of points out to the fact that I think both of these guys were assimilated pretty early on. This is when they burn the dog thing. Notice how it gets torched, and then the first people on the scene with fire extinguishers are Palmer and Norris. While you could chalk this up to them just trying to prevent a fire, I think really the possibility here is that they were both already assimilated and were rushing in to save one of their species. Being aware that they know that the crew doesn't know that you have to burn these things a little while to completely stop cellular activity. Just a fun little thing I noticed. It could be bullshit, it could just be like whatever, but it is neat to think that they're like, okay, these guys don't know that you have to burn this thing for a while, let's put it out so that we have some backup for later. It's an interesting thing to think about. Ha, get it? Yeah, throw stuff. But this is a movie, for every answer you come up with, you get more questions. Like, if both Palmer and Norris were assimilated by the time the dog thing got hatched, there's one major question, and that is, why didn't they jump MacReady when they went out to the crash site? Now, there are a few possibilities of this. Like, of course, obviously one of those is that it would have been too obvious. At that point, there was a basic understanding of how the thing worked, and if one of them got outed, all of them would be under suspicion. And then, of course, there's the other theory that, you know, it was only one of them that was assimilated at this time, but I don't subscribe to that theory. My personal reasoning for why they didn't assimilate MacReady at the crash site was because it was too risky. Even though it was a 2-on-1 situation and MacReady didn't have a flamethrower, MacReady's the only one who knows how to fly the chopper. Although Palmer does indicate that he knows how to fly it, they tell him no. Like, he is a mechanic. I don't know if that makes him a pilot, though. But nevertheless, if they both tried to get MacReady while they were out in the cold and MacReady got away or got killed, they would have been stranded in the middle of a storm, which would have freezed both of them out, which meant that there would have been no more things left. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. But again, another question gets brought up, like, why didn't Palmer assimilate Childs? They were roommates, they were sleeping together. But again, you can chalk that up to it would have been way too obvious. Maybe the rooms were close to each other and somebody would have heard what was going on if there was a struggle. What I like to think happened is that Norris was assimilated first, and then he got Palmer, and the two colluded to sow distrust in the rest of the camp before trying to assimilate everyone. It picks and chooses its victims. Even MacReady himself says that if all of them were things, they would just jump them right now. It has an angle that it works. Palmer being assimilated is pretty easy to see in hindsight. He's nowhere to be found during Blair's breakdown, and when he does lock Blair up, he's there to hear about the blood test. And then, of course, Carpenter points out that he has no color in his eyes during the blood test scene, whereas everybody does, indicating that he's a thing. And little bits of his behavior could indicate this, as he's a very clear-cut comic relief stoner character when he's introduced, but he kind of gets more serious, which is easily concealed given the plot. Norris is always harder to pin down. Like, he comes out as a genuine surprise surprised that he's assimilated because he's not acting really that weird, which is why I like to think that Norris got first. And there's a lot less hints to him being assimilated because he gets a lot less screen time than even Palmer. Charles Hallahan, his actor, tried to play the part of Norris as if he was unsure of whether or not he was the Thing. And in all honesty, while I do admire the actor putting in work, I also find that it kinda takes away from how the Thing works, which, I don't know. Like, I don't like the idea that it can just, like, kind of make you think you're still you. I think as soon as it gets you, like, you're God. And it will play your role, it will definitely try to be you and not get caught, but yeah, there's, like, in the book, there's a whole thing where it can assimilate you, but you'll still be walking around kind of as a sleeper agent, not knowing that you're assimilated, but I mean, I don't really like this for the movie. Like, there are a few hints that you can see in hindsight, like, when they bring in the split face thing, Norris is kind of shockingly reacting different to it, and then you do always see Norris and Palmer kind of together in shots as if they're colluding, so I don't know, this might just be something I missed, maybe I'm looking too much into it, but there are hints that Norris is the Thing. But again, I'm not going to take anything away from Charles Hallahan, God rest his soul. He played the part in a way that is pretty admirable. I just don't agree with the whole thing that people who are assimilated don't quite know they're assimilated. Now, I mentioned the Thing doesn't really do a whole lot up front, but when Palmer gets revealed as a Thing, we get a great payoff to this whole blood test thing. And everybody is freaking out because they're tied down, this guy's like mutating and turning into this freak monster. Windows gets mauled because the flamethrower malfunctions. And like, Windows' death is just like, it's so obvious that they have like a dummy there, and it looks really cheesy, but it's like they don't really hold on it that long, so it's not that bad, but I like this scene all in all, even if it is a little corny with the dummy effect.
Hey, that dummy can't hurt you. He's not even alive. He's dead.
Now, one effect that I can't unsee is when the Palmer thing hits the ceiling. It's so obvious they just did it in an upside down room because like a piece of the ceiling panel like breaks and falls onto it. I'm guessing at this point they were like, fuck it, we can't get around this, just leave it. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is the part where Kurt Russell almost blew himself up with dynamite. When they had the Palmer thing dummy burning outside of the facility, like Kurt Russell didn't know what kind of blast the dynamite would produce, so when he throws it at the burning Palmer and it blows, he actually almost took himself out with a real stick of dynamite. At this point now, Palmer's dealt with, Norris is dealt with, they've pretty much figured out who's who. The only person who's unaccounted for is Blair. So they go to test him, because if he comes up clean, they've won. They've eliminated the threat. Which of course means that Blair was assimilated at some point and has tunneled out of his tool shed and is building a spacecraft. Which leads us to the climax, and also of course brings up more questions. Figuring out when Blair was assimilated might actually be like the hardest one to nail down.
I'm not gonna harm anybody, and there's nothing wrong with me. And if there was, I'm all better now. I'd like to come back inside. Now you got my promise.
Many popular theories indicate that his mental breakdown could have been an indication of him being assimilated, but I personally don't see that. Some fans theorize that him touching the remains of the dead Thing and putting the pencil in his mouth was it, but that's more so an error on Wilford Brimley's part, as he just kinda did it absentmindedly while acting. I think my guess is they put Blair away in isolation, and at that point between then and the blood test sabotage was when he was assimilated. I'm thinking it was Blair that was the one who attacked Fuchs. He clearly had a tunnel going. He probably was able to tunnel out during the power outage and do what he was gonna do. One indicator of him possibly being assimilated was when Blair is asking if he can come back inside and he's not crazy anymore. There's something off-putting there, but who knows. Going back to MacReady preferring to flip the board rather than lose, he decides, fuck it, we're just gonna blow this whole facility down and everybody's gonna die. It's a 4v1 situation, but they don't know where Blair is. It's nighttime, there's a storm, he can easily slip between areas of the facility and hide out. They destroy the spaceship, they start destroying the facility, and they go to blow out the power room since the power's already been cut, and this is where we get to the final showdown. Gary dies like horribly brutally, like this fucked me up as a kid. I was like, Jesus Christ. Knowles goes missing, and then MacReady gets confronted by the Blair Thing and manages to blow it up with dynamite.
You too!
This whole climax thing is pretty tense, although at this point we know who the thing is, so there's no real chance of like getting jumped by anything. But I guess the idea of like everybody kind of having to separate and Blair being within the vicinity, like able to take them out, is creepy enough. The only real downside here to the climax is there's not really a lot that they do here. And this is because there was supposed to be a scene of the Blair thing trying to attack MacReady, and it was all done in stop motion, and Carpenter had it cut because he thought it didn't look convincing. But yeah, I say this is a worthy climax, especially because of MacReady's little one-liner. Oh, and also, like, it's funny, they have two black people in this movie. One of them does survive, and one of them, like, doesn't die till the end, which subverts the whole black guy dies first trope. And we don't even see what happens to Knowles. Again, there was a scene they were going to do to show his death, but they decided to just not do it and leave it ambiguous, and I think that makes it a little bit more effective. Although it does still, like, kind of add to my thing that the thing is pretty ineffective up front, because this giant, like, mass of flesh and tentacles comes out, and all it does is bare its teeth before it gets blown up.
Fuck you too!
And in the end, Childs returns, having wandered off earlier in the climax, claiming he thought he saw Blair in the storm and got lost, which is pretty sus, but at this point, MacReady has no more fight left in him. The entire camp's blown up, they're both gonna freeze to death, he's defeated every confirmed thing, and, you know, while there is the possibility that Childs is a thing, MacReady doesn't have anything he can really do about it. They're both gonna die, it's really just a 50-50 chance if Childs ends up being a thing and the rescue team gets infected. So all he can do is just sit back, he can finally sip his booze and have a drink with Childs, who he has been kind of an adversary to throughout the movie, but fuck it.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
That line is either completely badass or completely haunting, because that's it, the movie's over. As far as we know, they either won, or Childs is a thing and MacReady just can't do anything, and they're both destined to just, like, die. With the possibility that Childs will end up bringing the thing back to the mainland when the rescue team shows up. Of course, this was always intended to be the ending, but there do exist two other endings, one that was released and one that was not. As a safety precaution, just in case there was any producer pushback, John Carpenter did shoot an ending in which MacReady gets airlifted out by helicopter and administers the blood test to himself, proving that he's not a thing. This was never released. However, in certain TV airings during the 80s on cable, there was an ending that showed a dog running away from the burning remains of the camp, indicating that the whole thing was just going to start over again. Get it thing? Yeah, graphic black. Reportedly, John Carpenter was not a fan of them using this, and it is considered non-canon. And you know what? This ending is just fine. For decades, fans have debated whether or not Childs was a thing, with many pointing out, oh, his jacket is different, that means that somebody ripped through his clothes, or oh, he has no fog on his breath, which might indicate that he's a thing. But in reality, it could have just been really humid out that day, like you don't get fog on your breath in the cold when it's super humid. And this theory just kind of kept getting fed, like, you know, on either end. When the Thing prequel came out, that determined that the creature couldn't imitate something like fillings or piercings, which added to the Childs not being a thing factor because he had his earring at the end. But I don't know how much we can factor in like something from a movie that was made in 2011 when making theories about a movie made in 1982. Nevertheless, the debate over this is something that has plagued the fan base for years. I think the dumbest theory is that MacReady gave Childs a bottle of gasoline, and that's how we know he's a thing. There's a lot of like funny ones, there's a lot of dumb ones, and there's a lot of genuinely okay ones, but like personally, I like to look at it as we don't know. We don't need to know. The story's over. You know, you can make it up as you go along at this point. I don't want to go on to like why the gasoline thing doesn't work. The Thing takes memories and would know what booze tastes like. It has human taste buds. It would know. You know what? If you want to be stupid and come up with stupid theories like the fucking bottle having gasoline in it, I have something for you. Childs wasn't a thing, but MacReady was a thing. I mean, we do see that the Thing is willing to abandon its own to survive, so maybe MacReady decided to just blow the entire camp up to get rid of the humans and to prevent Blair from winning and leaving him to freeze. Maybe he was jealous that Blair only made a spaceship for itself. I don't know. See, theories can be smart, but theories can be stupid too. And to be completely serious, I do not believe that MacReady was a thing, but that's the beauty of this movie. You can really interpret it however you want within reason. It's an open book. Whether you want to believe that Norris got assimilated before Palmer, whether you believe that Childs was a thing, or that Blair got Fuchs, whatever. Even John Carpenter himself has said that he can't decide whether or not Childs was infected. And while some supplemental materials have gone either way, with sequel comics having Child be a thing, but the sequel video game having him frozen and dead, it's an open book. You can really just look at this however you want, and it's the right answer. John Carpenter's The Thing is the greatest terrestrial science fiction horror movie of all time. I say terrestrial because, well, Alien is the best one based in space. John Carpenter's The Thing is a movie that when you first see it, you don't know what to expect, and everything that happens comes as a shock. And then, you go back to it, you watch it again, and while you know what's gonna happen, it does still keep you guessing, but in a good way. Even though there are a lot of twists and turns, there isn't anything that doesn't make sense, just things that you can interpret differently. And one of the thing's crowning achievements is the special effects. I didn't really gush over that enough. I mean, it's not the sole reason the movie's good, but it is so good. It is good almost to a fault, because when this movie was being reviewed by critics, like when it came out, all the old-ass movie critics who hate horror could not get past them. Roger Ebert, the fat fuck that he is, referred to it as a great barf bag movie, stating that he was genuinely scared by the movie, but that the special effects overshadowed it, and it basically turned it into a geek show. I resent that statement, and in recent years, a lot of critics have moved past that sentiment. But yeah, it seems at the time, people weren't able to catch on to the paranoia aspects, to the tension building, and to the mystery of it all, and were just so fixated on the gore effects because they were that good. And I think all the negative reviews that it got in the past that focus specifically on it being excessively violent can be attributed to the movie just being way too ahead of its time. Gore effects, especially in big studio projects, were not really seen on this level at this point in time. Sure, some more low-rent horror movies might have had them, but aside from maybe Alien and a couple that I might be missing, big studio sci-fi movies did not go to this length. I mean, you have to look at this here, nowadays this would be done with CG, because, the practical effects to do this are insane. The ability to show this creature that, breaks down and reforms itself is unfathomable to think about, and this is about as realistic as they could have done it. And if I had to guess, being, a movie critic, especially if you're an old fucking crotch like Roger Ebert, this would be jarring to see. You had never seen anything like this before. And in terms of excessive violence, that's just not what the general movie-going audience was accustomed to at that point in time. Throughout the 60s and 70s, yes, there were violent scenes in movies, but for the most part, it was pretty basic. Some of it was over-dramatized, and it wasn't too graphic. But the sad part is, the special effects work almost too well, because at the time of release, they were so visceral and graphic that it overshadowed the rest of what the movie had to offer. And to kind of lend credence to my ahead of its time statement, once again referring to Roger Ebert, we look at his review of The Fly, a movie that had comparably disgusting special effects, and he not only gave it dashingly good reviews, but he went so far as to say that it was snubbed from the Academy Awards because it was a horror movie. Which, when you look at John Carpenter's The Thing, it wasn't nominated for anything but some fucking Razzies. With the kind of modern nuance, the special effects in The Thing no longer overshadow what is a pretty much all-around perfect sci-fi horror movie. Nowadays, people can realize that what you see is pretty disturbing, but it's really what you don't see that makes this movie scary. Nowadays, people can accept the special effects, it's something that they can fathom, and they can understand that the real horror of the movie is watching a group of otherwise rational men in the Antarctic succumb to paranoia, fear, and lack of common sense as they are infiltrated by an invisible enemy. In a sense, John Carpenter's The Thing is very similar to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I guess, technically speaking, that would mean that Invasion of the Body Snatchers is similar to Who Goes There, but anyway. There is a difference, though. It's not just your average body snatcher film, because in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it becomes pretty easy for them to figure out who's a body snatcher or whatever. In John Carpenter's The Thing, they really never come up with a way to identify who is a thing at a first glance. It requires a much more difficult kind of blood test, and even then, it's it goes to shit. That's because unlike the pod people, the Thing can imitate human behavior perfectly. It can imitate imitate their host's personality traits to blend in. In Body Snatchers, the big identifying thing is that people lose their personality traits. And it's like, had MacReady and Copper not gone to the camp, and had MacReady later not come up with the blood test idea, like, they wouldn't have figured anything out and everybody would have gotten assimilated. There are just hours upon hours of discussions to be had about this movie, and as a result, there have been internet forums, subreddits, and many other groups that just discuss The Thing. There are countless YouTube theory videos, there are countless fucking arguments within the comment sections of those YouTube theory videos. It's a movie people have been talking about for now going on almost half a century. And to be completely honest, when it comes to theories, I don't like concrete explanations for anything. Producer Stuart Cohen has stated that Blair was not going to use the ship to go to the mainland, that he was just going to try to leave Earth. And it's like, that's a nice little theory for someone to have, and I do, accept that he can maybe theorize that, but I just like it that, he's making a ship, we don't know what he's going to do with the ship. We just have to go on, our own imagination. You can interpret John Carpenter's The Thing however you want within reason, and it would likely be the truth if you believe it's the truth. Now, going back to it, I've mentioned the critical reception, but John Carpenter's The Thing was not a success at the box office either. It did break even technically, but as I mentioned, it was savaged by the critics, like, so bad that the failure of the movie sent John Carpenter into a depression. There are many factors behind this, like, for one, 1982 was kind of a recession year, so people weren't looking to be, put down at the movies. They wanted something a bit more, like upbeat. At the time that The Thing was in theaters, E.T. was dominating the box office. It also had to compete with another great science fiction movie in Blade Runner, which came out the same weekend that The Thing came out. And Blade Runner didn't do very well either, so that kind of just whittled down John Carpenter's The Thing's possible gains. And to round that all up, aside from E.T. being a smashing success at the box office, Star Trek II Wrath of Khan was there. Although in the long run, with the advent of home video and people reassessing these movies, both Blade Runner and The Thing would go on to be what are commonly considered the best science fiction movies ever made. Which is kind of funny that they both released on the same day, and that both of these movies have plenty of interpretations and theories out there on the internet. Nevertheless, despite not initially doing well at the box office, John Carpenter's The Thing was able to redeem itself through airings on television and on home video. And with every subsequent home video release, the film does gain more and more fans. With The Thing coming out on home video and DVD and kind of, moving around, having more people see it, it would get the respect that it deserved. And the respect that it deserves is that it is considered to be one of, if not the best science fiction horror movies ever made. And to add to that, it is also commonly considered to be John Carpenter's best movie besides maybe Halloween or Big Trouble in Little China. And with that distinction, it has become a staple of pop culture. The general concept, which again was originally introduced by Who Goes There, has been utilized in homage by multiple pieces of media. There are countless Star Trek episodes that have taken this dynamic. There's an X-Files episode. There are also countless video games that pay homage to The Thing. The Dead Space series takes the body horror aspect and is definitely inspired by The Thing, but then there's also the multiplayer game Among Us, which takes the paranoia and deception aspect. So while The Thing wasn't a success at its onset, it became part of cinema history to a point that to this day it is still referenced and homaged. Unfortunately, at the time of its release, as I mentioned, John Carpenter fell into a really deep depression over the failure of this movie. It was this that pushed him to do the more upbeat and optimistic Starman, which to this day is the only John Carpenter movie to receive an Academy Award nomination. It's also worth noting that The Thing is the first in John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, which aren't narratively linked but all are conceptually similar films inspired by Carpenter's affinity for the works of H.P. Lovecraft. These are all movies that feature a sort of end-of-the-world type scenario, and it's comprised of The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. Hollywood would take notice as the cult fan base for The Thing grew and grew, and in several instances there were attempts to make a follow-up to this movie. In the 90s, Chuck Ferrer developed a comic book sequel in which MacReady and Childs are rescued and taken to Argentina, and there's a Thing outbreak on the mainland. This comic sequel was well liked by John Carpenter, who in 1999 stated that while no serious discussion of a Thing sequel had occurred, he would like to have based a sequel to his movie on these comics, considering them to be a worthy follow-up to his movie. In 2005, the Sci-Fi channel had worked with Frank Darabont Beaumont and David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, bro, shorten your fucking name, on a 4-episode miniseries titled The Thing Returns, which would have had a Russian team discover the Thing in the aftermath of the original movie, where they would find the protagonist dead and would have ended up taking a sample back to Russia, which then would have jumped us 23 years ahead where there was a Thing outbreak in New Mexico. There is some material online you can read up on for the first few episodes of this series, and some other video creators have done videos on this, but in the end, for whatever reason, Universal chose to move forward instead with a feature film sequel rather than this miniseries, a feature film sequel that ended up in development hell. I do recall reading something that they wanted to do Kurt Russell and Keith David coming back for the sequel, and they would have used like being exposed to the cold as the excuse as to why they look older, but that never really came about. Nothing happened with that. In 2011, a prequel to The Thing was released, and this prequel takes place at the Norwegian camp before the events of the first movie. Now, I don't know if I'm ever gonna do a video on the prequel. Like, part of me wants to, part of me doesn't want to have to sit through it again. So I'm gonna like kind of just briefly touch on it here, but not too much as to throw out doing a video on it later. But to kind of round things up, the prequel was a disappointment. While it does take place before the original and tries to link itself to that movie, it doesn't really, do very well in that department. I don't care how beautiful Mary Elizabeth Winstead is, it really doesn't fix the fact that this movie just kind of over-explains things. Like how we see an axe in the wall in the original when they visit the Norwegian camp. That means in this movie they had to like completely feature that and have the character try to attack a thing with an axe, which is just kind of dumb. It also has some really bad special effects. I mean, not by the fault of the special effects team, they actually did use practical effects and try to make the movie like kind of in line with the 82 movie, but for some reason Universal felt compelled to step in and told them to just cake CGI over all the hard practical work because they thought nobody would buy the effects as real. So in response to that, I'm going to show the image of the monster from the end of The Thing 2011, and just look at that. That looks fucking horrible. I don't think the prequel is particularly bad. It does have its moments, it's just not very good, and it could have been better. It seems like this was a clear-cut case of studio interference, and I don't know, they wanted to follow the spirit of the original, but they were forced to kind of pace it up and make it more like an actionized, high-octane movie, to kind of dumb it down for general audiences. So, the shortest review I can give it is saying that The Thing 2011 is a dumbed-down, paced-up version of the original, because the plot beats are pretty much the same, too. It's a prequel, but it also just is called The Thing, so it sounds like a remake, and it is basically just a remake, just with the different setting and framed as a prequel.
That's the stupidest fucking thing I ever heard.
In 2020, Universal had stated intention to do yet another remake of The Thing. This comes off of the heels of the fact that in 2019, a manuscript for a full-length version of the original novella was found. That's right, apparently Who Goes There was meant to be a lot longer, and this new manuscript was released as Frozen Hell. Universal's proposed remake states that the movie would take aspects of the newly discovered Frozen Hell manuscript as well as both movie adaptations, The Thing from Another World and John Carpenter's The Thing. It is worth noting that we are now 6 years from when this news broke and no further information has been released, so at this point in time I'm going to consider this either in development hell, shelved, or outright cancelled. Now, it would be kind of hypocritical to say that I don't think there should be a remake, because the movie itself is a remake, but John Carpenter's The Thing is a remake of an even looser adaptation of the source material, and the remake of that serves to bring it closer to the source material, so it's kind of hard to even really consider John Carpenter's The Thing a remake of The Thing from Another World. But with that being said, if they want to do a Frozen Hell adaptation and take some notes from both of the other movies, sure, no harm, no foul, just don't make it shit. But the problem is with The Thing is this movie still does reach people. It still looks so good to this day. Every so often it does show up in movie theaters for a one night only thing, and it usually does draw a crowd. It's one of the few movies where I can't really find any flaws that bring it down on a meaningful level. I guess if I wanted to nitpick, it is a little slow, so if you're not in the mood for it, you might not be in the mood for it, but when you do get in the mood for it, it's truly one of the best of its kind. Now, before I close this out, I want to kind of just talk about when I first saw this movie. I saw this movie when I was 7 years old. Keep in mind, my parents didn't really censor what I watched. The only thing they were really against me watching was anything with excessive sexuality or nudity, or straight up horror. I don't know why they thought sci-fi horror was more acceptable. I guess they thought more realistic horror or killer movies would kind of make me scared, but sci-fi horror, they could easily tell me that such a thing doesn't exist. I don't know. I had seen The Fly remake and its sequel as well as The Blob remake at an even younger age because these movies aired on Space. space, but The Thing was a movie that at this point I guess I didn't end up even really seeing anything on until I was a little older. It never really aired on the Space Channel, or at least when it did, I didn't see it. My first exposure to this film was the Todd McFarlane movie Maniacs toy line. So there was this comic shop in my old neighborhood. Now, I live in the west end of Toronto now, but I'm an East End kid through and through, and there was a comic shop at Greenwood and Danforth, which any Torontonians who are roughly my age from that area may remember. When I first started going there, it was called Shining Knight Comics, and they later rebranded it to Comics and More, and my dad was kind of acquainted with the owner. He was this guy named Bob, who sadly passed away about 11 years ago, and we'd always stop in, say hello, sometimes buy some comics, and what have you. Essentially, Shining Knight / Comics and More was my first comic shop, and being a comic shop, there was always a display of figures for sale, and amongst them were numerous releases for the McFarlane movie Maniacs line. And they did a line that included some creatures from The Thing. All I remember is being pretty young, I would have been 3rd grade, and I was just fascinated by these horrid abominations. The two figures they had was the Blair monster and the Norris monster that came with the little head spider. And I remember just my dad would be talking to the comic guy, whatever, I'd be looking at comics, he'd be looking at comics, and then I'd be kind of just perplexed by these figures. Kind of just looking at them, I guess internally I was thinking what the fuck is this? What are these things? Not really knowing what the movie was, not understanding the concept of the film, and only seeing these monsters completely out of context. My older cousins, the one who I'd watched The Fly and the Blob with, had rented this movie at some point when I wasn't around, and keep in mind, by that time I was about 7, so they would have been going into high school and hitting that horror phase. You know, the one every teenager hits when they're in their early teens, or at least used to. And I remember bringing it up and asking if they'd seen it, and they were raving about it. They were like, oh, this is the greatest, that's such a great movie or whatever, so that made me want to see it even more. But sadly, since it never came on TV, and they never rented it when I was there, I didn't get to see it. However, let's just say the Toronto Public Library came to the rescue. So my family, I won't specify which parent, but it wasn't my dad, had an issue with rental places when I was a kid. So at the time, due to not returning movies for whatever reason, we couldn't rent. My mom, for whatever reason, just went delinquent on rentals. I don't recall ever having had a Blockbuster card. I think we got banned from Jumbo, and I guess Rogers, I don't even remember ever having a Rogers card either. But nevertheless, at that point in time, we did not have a rental membership. My dad couldn't get one for himself because he didn't have a credit card, and the bridges were probably burned with the local mom and pop shops as well. I don't remember. But essentially, unless I was at a friend's house and they were renting movies, the only way I would get to see movies that I didn't own or weren't on TV was to utilize the Toronto Public Library. Now, the library had a good collection of tapes, but where it really shined was the fact that you could go on their computer and look at the inventory of the entire library system, which is one of the largest systems of libraries in the world, and you could reserve a tape and have it shipped from one library to your local library, and it usually only took a couple days depending on if it was taken out already and how far it was coming from. And this was all free, so there's a lot of movies that I saw through the library that just a lot of people were nostalgic over. It had a good collection. And I know that makes me sound really fucking poor. I mean, I wasn't really that poor back then. It's just, some people in my family were not really beholden to their own responsibilities and never returned tapes. I remember we got the movie, it showed up, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna watch The Thing. And then we got there, we got home, my dad was like, okay, put it on. I was like, in a minute. And for some reason I was intimidated by this movie. I didn't want to watch it at first, but then my dad was just like, well, you might as well just watch it, you got it, whatever. And I put it on, and while the movie was creepy and disturbing and paranoia inducing, it's not really a jump scare movie. It's one of those things where it's you build something up in your head and scare yourself more than the actual movie scares you. But then I watched it, and while I didn't quite understand it on a higher level, I did enjoy it. And I would watch it several times over as I was growing up and love it more every time. But I purposely hold off on watching this movie, and this is based off of a lesson I learned from my dad. My dad's favorite movie, or one of his favorite movies of all time, is The Road Warrior, and he has never owned The Road Warrior. And I always remember asking him, Dad, how come you don't own a copy of The Road Warrior? And he would tell me because if he owned it, he'd watch it too much and it wouldn't be his favorite movie anymore. So even though I do own The Thing on Blu-ray and I can kind of access it however I want with streaming services or the internet, it's a movie I really hold off on rewatching. And I think it kind of helps that it's since it's a slower movie, you kind of have to be in the mood for it. But every time I watch this movie again, I just love it even more. And in all honesty, it's crazy to think that almost 30 years ago was the first time I saw this movie, and I still love it all the same. And even though the movie itself is pushing 50, it still looks and feels like it hasn't missed a beat and could fit into modern times. So with that being said, what are your thoughts on The Thing? Do you have any crazy interpretations interpretations you want to share, any theories you subscribe to, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button, drop a subscribe, drop a comment, whatever. See you later.
I know you gentlemen have been through a lot. And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!